Welcome to our second IED MASTERBRAND podcast. Today we are honored to introduce our course coordinator, Gordon Cesareo, our passionate brand strategy teacher, and our brand design consultant. Here at IED, you can find Gordon supervising the students of brand strategy and management. I'm your host, Colin, and here at MasterBrand, hope these insights will serve you in some way, shape, or form. Now let's hear from you, Gordon. How are you today at the end of the day? Can you describe a little bit more about what you do?
Well, first, thank you for having me. I think I feel quite excited, and I'm a bit curious as well as to what kind of questions you're going to be asking me, but let's roll it on. Here at YED, I coordinate the Master for Brand Strategy and Management, as you well know. So the way I see what I do is guiding the students through the strategic process. At the same time, I try to connect classroom teaching, which, as we know, is a simulation with real world branding. Outside of YED, I'm a brand consultant, and I also focus on design. And I help brands to clarify their position. So I go from identity to experience, from the strategic being of these brands to how they're going to talk to their audiences.
I hear a lot of this strategy and creativity in your work right now, right? Is it fair to say that at this intersection of creativity, do you think there is something within this that most people tend to underestimate?
I think that's a really nice question because it represents the dilemma in our job, in our task.
Yeah.
I think that each one undervalues the other. So strategy does not like to have vague points.
Yeah. Okay.
Whereas the creative does not like to have these constraints that strategy seems to place. I think that both need to be the co-authors of brand value. Strategy gives creativity a purpose, and creativity gives strategy some soul. I think when you have a good strategy in place, you do not notice it. It is invisible.
The strategy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the creativity is simply the means of bringing that strategy to life. So I think that creativity needs to have a framework for it to happen, and that is the strategy. So these two very important disciplines go hand to hand.
Do you think they go hand to hand across almost every industry? Like almost everything would need some type of creativity and some type of strategy?
Well, strategy needs implementation and execution.
Yes.
And I always like to call it creativity because whatever it is, we're bringing something that is theoretical and applying it in the into the real world. Now, whether you are a manufacturing industry, whether you are an industry that's directly positioned in the creative arts, I don't think it matters. I think the process is the same. You create yourself a map and then you follow it.
Every strategy needs that execution, right? Okay, this is interesting.
Well, a strategy that has no execution is no strategy.
It's just a plan.
Because you cannot sell it.
Okay.
And a strategy that is not sold is a strategy that does not exist.
Yeah.
As far as we know.
Only theoretical. No, I understand. To me, the one that really interests me is I'm trying to apply this to, because right now, obviously, it's very clear in branding how strategy and creativity go hand in hand. I looked a little bit into your background here, and I saw you work across many different industries, fast-moving consumer goods, B2B. Do you approach this intersection? Do you approach your strategic analytics differently across different landscapes? How do you go into a new industry and plan for that?
Well, that's another good question, and it took me a while to try and figure that out because I kind of have to look at myself in the mirror, and it's not always easy to dissect what you do in everyday life. I think the first thing is to listen very, very carefully and not to make any assumptions and to learn exactly what the situation is from the point of view of the client. I think that then I like to do a lot of research, and I do research both top down, which means I look into whatever I find online and go into any kind of sources that might be handy, sources given to me by the client, or research that I with my colleagues have to do. And then I also look at it from bottom up. So I try to look at the culture, I try to understand what's happening at a street level and try to gauge, try to take the man in the street point of view of the situation.
Yeah.
and try to come up with a good cross section of what is going on, the
Okay.
reality of it. Neither just looking at a problem from on high or looking at it from below. I think I always, or try to anyway, look cross category for inspiration.
Cross category.
Yeah, so you look at other sectors, find similar situations.
A different perspective almost on the situation.
Well, it hopefully it does throw that. We need to understand how other people have solved it across the same problem. Usually exists in different sectors. So you either have a problem in communication, you have a problem in the understanding of what it is you do, or you have a problem internally. The brand doesn't know what it really stands for. And therefore, in order to solve all these, you need a 360-degree view before you can start to, let us say, think of a framework for creating some order.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting because obviously it's very clear to look at your competitors for what they do and how they might solve situations, but also cross category is something that we've been encouraged, at least for our classes as well.
Well, it's interesting you bring up competitors because I think that not enough focus is put on competitors. What I find interesting is what is not being said. I want to know what the competitors are saying, and I also want to know what they're not saying, because that is what I think we should consider saying ourselves. I think the last thing is also then I look for attention between contradictions, and they're usually humankind. It's the typical insight finding situation, but there is always some kind of dilemma or some kind of tension, and the point is, can you identify it, and can you bring the human element into it, and that will open a few doors as well.
I like this person on the ground view that you mentioned. I mean, realistically, that's the buyer for most of these, especially FMCG. So it's important to see what they think as well.
It could be the buyer, it could be a potential buyer, or it could be somebody that used to buy and doesn't buy anymore. I think that it's also how are you going to stick top of mind in your audience, where the aim of every brand is to extend and to create associations in people's minds, and therefore become part of the culture, so to speak. It's very difficult for most brands because you have to have the right product, right placing, right time, the right situation. But I think what can be achieved is that within the sector itself, you can achieve enough notoriety to be able to be compared to in certain benefits or in certain aspects of your service or product, especially in a B2B situation. Here in Italy, I think the B2B is overwhelmingly present. This is a manufacturing country, a strong heritage, and from a branding point of view, still a lot of work to be done in this area
for B2B. Yeah.
To improve relationships between B2B, other suppliers, and the B2C audience. And I think that it can only lead to smoother relationships between everybody and a better product at the end of the day.
I've always loved this idea of branding as like storytelling to tie things together and make a clear image. So this is very interesting that ties into my framework a little bit. And maybe a little bit of storytelling. I don't know if we can get a bit personal here, or something from your expertise, but for the person on the ground that might be watching this interview, that might be interested in tuning in, somebody new coming into this creative industry, do you have something that maybe you would say they're overlooking or something they're underestimating?
Ooh, that's a loaded question, isn't it?
There's a lot of students possibly watching this.
Yeah, I think a lot of focus is telling people explaining our skill set and showing people what we've done. And I think that we're not that interested. We know you can do things. Show me how you think. I'm more interested how you've arrived from point A to point whatever it is. And I think the more we go along, what we've done is less important. It's really our thought processes. That is what makes us, I think, unique in the way we approach problems and solve them. So I would much rather listen to somebody to explain to me what he sees and how he would approach a problem than jumping already to possible solutions. I think we have a tendency to want to go to a solution path immediately, and that is, I don't think that's the right thing to do. But I think going back to what you asked me, if I was just starting out, I would post regularly short things, maybe about strategic subjects or put myself. It takes a lot of courage because you have to maybe create a sort of small campaign about yourself, but you have to get used to positioning yourself properly in social media and be very aware of what kind of message you're sending out, because right at the beginning, you really want to capture that job. You really want to capture people's imaginations.
Yeah.
What I really want to know about you is you yourself. What dimension will you bring to the organization if we agree to
that human process, that thinking
very
process.
very much. Yes.
This is very interesting because even for this master alone, the interview, I feel like it was something that you weren't just asking simple interview questions, but you were really trying to poke my mind almost and really trying to get my perspective on things. Is this something you think about during your interviews?
Very much, because look, I think that first of all, we solve problems as a whole. We solve problems in groups. There is no such thing as the hero strategist, the one person who goes in and saves the world. It doesn't happen that way. So the makeup of the group and how people get along together and personal ambitions and personal drivers are very, very important. I like to think that at the end of the day, and I say this to many of my students, that you need to be the person at the end of this intensive 1 year that other people want to work for. So what I would give advice to students starting out is follow people you admire, go and talk to them and find out what makes them special. And rather than targeting brands and companies, go after people, because really people want to work for people.
I mean, that's what you can really learn from, right? The people.
Exactly. Yeah. There is a continuation in the learning and experience that goes on. And I think you should try to be part of that, so that in turn you can then pass it on to somebody else. And let's face it, it's not an easy sector to work in, and it's very pressurized. And I think that to consider the human element first and foremost is really quite important, because you cannot expect people to work without having some connection between them as a team or as a group and achieve what they can achieve. I think that it's important that there is some cohesion within the group on a personal level first.
I like this idea of continuation, and if I can expand a little bit on this as well, for the people that may look up to you for inspiration, for people that may see you've been in the industry for quite a while, you would say your expertise in the matter is significant. What type of vision do you have for people that may look up to you, for people that may the next generation of brand strategists?
Wow, that makes me feel very I don't know how I feel about it. But anyway, as I said before, we have a focus on knowing. And we live in times of huge uncertainty. So curiosity is good, because we cannot know. We cannot move in with ideas and be very anxious because we need to know. Actually, not knowing is comfortable. Not knowing is good. Uncertainty is good because it's going to keep us on our toes. And we are not... There is not one answer. Maybe there could be a number of options, and it depends on the small levels that will be applicable to our case. I think, therefore, staying uncomfortable, there is something to be said for staying uncomfortable, let us say, in the first part of any type of project. I think another important thing, which I find that is difficult, it's difficult for me, let alone students, and that would be the ability to zoom in, therefore details, and zoom out, and therefore see the macro. We weren't born with the ability to do both at the same time. Some people are good at one, some people are good at the other, and this is where the team comes in.
Having a good mix.
You have people who are detail oriented, then you kind of ask somebody who is pretty good at offering the macro, and you kind of join to provide one vision. I did talk about the sort of team aspect of it. There is not one person who is better than the team. The team is much more powerful and is able to impact brands in a more significant way. I think the important thing is that simplicity. You should always strive for simplicity.
As in, it makes sense.
In every way. Whatever you do, simplicity is intelligence. That's what I think. We have a tendency to complicate the issue with so many details, which is the correct approach, but we have to simplify quickly and come to what is critical and fundamental for the problem that we need to deal with. And another thing is to make space for the culture around you. Understand the context before you speak. Read the room. This applies for a company, it applies for a team, it applies for working in another country. I think you really need to understand why people are talking the way they're talking. Why are they giving those answers? There has been discussion before. What was it about? And if you are in doubt, stay quiet, because I think there is more value in simply understanding what is going on and then asking the questions later than shooting from the hip. It doesn't mean you're going to get to the solution any faster. Finally, we all need to understand how to sell ourselves. That's I think critical. That comes from the way we have conditioned ourselves on social media. So not too much exposure, but to be confident in our abilities, and when we know we have a good idea, then to present that in a way that is the best option and not the only option. So a degree of humility in selling yourself,
but also being outspoken when you're right.
Confident.
Yeah.
Your confidence will come through if you have the right answer.
I like this.
But don't shove it down people's throats, because your right answer is somebody else's wrong decision.
Exactly.
So you really have to be careful about
that. That balance of humility is very interesting to me, and something that I think people can work on definitely is that balance of humility and outspokenness, that confidence. But another skill that really interested me and you mentioned is that keeping space for culture. How do you stay creative and something in standing out in this type of field? What do you do to really make sure your skills are almost honed? Do you read the news? Do you keep updated on the news?
No, I don't read the news. It's too depressing. No, what I do is I listen. A lot of people spend a lot of time while other people are talking thinking of the answer, and therefore they don't listen. And I think that if you do listen, it doesn't matter if you're going to just be quiet for a few seconds afterwards. I think it's accepted that you can think over what you're going to say. But I think to listen is definitely the most important point. And after that, I think that the ability to break things down into simple sketches. So even how you're explaining something complex, if you can draw it on a paper in a simple way, then you don't need to spend a quarter of an hour trying to explain something that can easily be understood with a simple drawing. I think not to underestimate that. I think also writing things out. I think to take the challenge and to take whatever it is and to write it out in your own words, and then you start to see it for what it is, because you understand that words are a form of commitment. You've committed yourself because you've written a word and it has that meaning. So if you write things out, then you're closer to arriving to the point where I think would be either a good starting point, or at least the point that's going to take you on to another area. But otherwise, I mean, keeping creativity is really just being very, very curious about what's going on around you, and understand new tools, start using new things, and understand what people are doing with them. You might want them to use them for one thing, but then you realize other, especially new digital tools or AI or whatever. So it really depends on the extent of experimentation you do on these things. I think it all contributes to enhancing your creativity. And anyway, it's very difficult to explain or define creativity. I think creativity is really a way of, let me see, when you can't get through the door, you get through the window, but first you have to find a way to open it. So creativity is sort of how you're going to open the window without breaking the glass.
But I like this idea of being creative on how to be creative as well, and using a different perspective on current tools, especially digital tools, as you said, and trying to make it your own way. I really like this. I guess moving on a little bit into something, as we've talked a lot about for students now, but maybe for people of this masters, when it comes to talking to the client, how do you focus on presenting your message in such a way that makes the client feel assured in your ideas, makes the client almost feel your confidence? As you said, it's important, confidence but humility. How do you manage this balance while talking to a client?
Well, it's about controlling risk. And I think that, first of all, you need to align on what success looks like. You need to align on the objectives so everybody is on the same page. People approach problems from very different angles. You need to understand the concerns, because success needs to overcome the concerns first and foremost
Of the
that
client.
the client and not the ones that you have. Prototyping things, so doing things in steps and showing the client how the next step is going to look like and testing that out. Always referencing similar cases that have happened before. So if we're going to suggest a new strategy, has there been a brand that has done, or brands that have done this before? What has been the outcome and how have they done it? Another thing which I think is really important is to reframe boldness as leadership, because sometimes you have to be bold in making certain decisions, and you can delay them, but they still have to be made. More delay is going to mean it's going to cost the company more money. So you're going to, at some point, you will have to be bold and make the decisions that count. So rather than look on the decisions in what are they going to cost the company, you need to look at the decisions in terms of you are leading the company to a new stage, and therefore change is inevitable. And the cleaner and sooner that it is done, that's the better it would be for everybody. I think that another thing that would help would be always storytelling in whatever you do.
Every aspect, you have a reason for it almost.
You justify it through the use of storytelling. Like I said, you bring in examples from brands, you bring in success stories from other categories, whatever you have at your disposal to reassure the client in reality, the outcome is as expected and will be as expected. And another thing which I think is really important, and possibly the most important thing, is that the client has to be part of the process. And they have to, I mean, it's from simple things, you create your strategy and the client says, well, I don't think we should be doing that. But if they're part of the process and they've made that decision together with you, then they understand, of course, there are negatives and positives to everything you do, because strategy, after all, is just a set of decisions. We're either going to go left or right, and each one has its own implications. But if a client is with you, then each one of these decisions can be discussed. And maybe then they will even impact the kind of strategy that you had in the long term. So I think that's definitely one thing that has always given very good dividends whenever that has happened.
Keeping the client informed.
The client is part of it. They know what you're doing, and they know how much work has gone into a specific stage, and what it means if you say, it took us a week to get here. The client will say, well, you just took that. What does it mean? Well, we took you through the process, and you understand all the implications and all the reasoning that we went through in order to come up with what we did.
I like this idea. I definitely will use a lot of what we said today for our current client project as well, and understanding that storytelling and keeping them involved and understanding how we got to certain things. I will definitely use a little bit of this, as well as the success stories of other categories and other brands. I'll be using that as well. But I think this is a good place to end off today's podcast. A huge thank you to you, Gordon.
Well, thank you to you, Colin. It's been an absolute pleasure.
With the team as well. I mean, I'll continue to be seeing Gordon. You can find Gordon here at IED, and we'll be bringing in more industry experts to share their knowledge and insights, just like today. And if you're curious about what's next to come, continue to follow along. And we hope to catch you on our third IED Master Brand podcast. Thank you.